Are you involved in a business or thinking about starting one? Do you know there may be environmental impacts from business activities? According to the Environmental Protection Act of 1996, businesses such as gas stations, rice mills, large-scale agriculture and poultry farms, large-scale mining and forestry operations, hotels, and resorts must be authorized. Persons proposing any of these activities need to submit an application for environmental authorization to the EPA.
Miss Sonia, wait, I want to ask you something.
Oh gosh,
Morning, Miss Sonia.
Morning, Miss Cheryl. I'm late for work.
I noticed the other day y'all had a big campaign with them police officers, so shutting down them people barbecue, wedding, dance. Man, how y'all expect these people to make money and survive?
Oh, Miss Cheryl, that is far from the truth. The EPA and the Guyana Police Force are actually working together to ensure that persons who conduct certain businesses and activities are authorized. We've tried to allow them to adhere to the noise regulations.
Well, this gotta be a new law. What law is this?
These laws were always in place. It's now that we're getting all these complaints at the agency, we are trying to enforce them. The Environmental Protection Act has been in place since 1996, and it states that persons and businesses must apply for environmental authorization before operating a sound-making device.
Well, girl, I never know this thing is prior to the law.
So if you're keeping a barbecue or an open-air function, like a wedding or a concert, especially in your community, right, and you're playing a music system, you have to apply for a short-term noise permit. And for persons that operate in a business and you got generators and stuff, you have to apply for a long-term permit. And that is applicable to bars and hotspots and clubs also.
Well, now that you explain it, I understand it. It's unfair to the elderly, sick people, and even them little children.
That is correct. According to the World Health Organization, loud noise can cause stress, sleep deprivation, and hearing impairment. And I'm sure you wouldn't want that.
Oh, now I understand. Thank you for explaining it, Miss Sonia.
For more information, you can contact the EPA at 225-5471 or visit our office at Ganges Street, North Sophia, Georgetown.
Hello and welcome to the Environment Matters, a monthly production of the Environmental Protection Agency in Guyana, where we explore the work of the agency in its quest to fulfill its mandate of environmental management and biodiversity conservation. In this month's episode, we will talk about complaints management and emergency response at the EPA. And audience, I know that environmental complaints is something that is prevalent in our society, and we're pleased to cover this topic on this month's episode. So joining me to talk about how the EPA manages environmental complaints and how it responds to environmental emergencies is Mr. Surjpaul Singh, and he is a senior environmental officer and head of the complaints unit at the EPA. So Surjpaul, this is your first time on this show. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So you have a very important task at the EPA because we know, as I said earlier, environmental complaints are very prevalent in our society, and more so as persons seek to have, that side hustle, as we call it, that second income generating activity. There's a lot more instances of environmental pollution. So let's get straight into our discussion by talking about the basis for EPA having to respond to environmental complaints. What does the Environmental Protection Act say about EPA's role in this regard?
All right. Well, as you mentioned, complaints, it's a very, very big matter or a big thing in Guyana because we have been receiving complaints about all nature across the length and breadth of Guyana. And the EPA was legally established in 1996 under the Environmental Protection Act. And a major component of that act deals with the control of pollution. And basically the act says that we are responsible for the management and the control of pollution in all its nature, right? However, there are some limitations in our act whereby we respond or we take into consideration those impacts or those pollution coming from industrial activities or commercial activities, right? However, the Act also gives us some powers to actually delegate responsibilities in terms of management of complaints to other agencies or other bodies. So the Act, while it encompasses the control or the level of pollution into the environment, we also have a very important role when it comes to investigating these complaints. We are responsible for recording these complaints and investigating these complaints, but also the Act gives us that power to delegate some functions to other agencies to actually help us to reduce those complaints.
Yes, and I know it's also important to note that the control of pollution, it not only happens after commercial activity has started, it happens prior to development projects coming on stream, because our environmental authorization process allows us to identify, where potential instances of pollution can happen, so we can control that pollution before the activity even starts. So this whole operation of complaints is just, in the instance that environmental pollution does happen.
Yeah, exactly. So the Environmental Protection Act speaks of forest development consent, whereby the agency is supposed to give that consent first. And before we give that consent or that permission or an authorization, we do what is called an inspection. And during that inspection, we identify these parameters that we look for. And if we see there is potential for pollution to occur, then we work with the developer, or we let them know that that this project might have the potential to release certain pollutants into the environment. So we work with them, we give them best practices, they produce management plans and EIA studies to help mitigate those issues.
All right, great. So now that we've laid the foundation for EPA's role, let's talk about the systems that are in place at the EPA for complaints management.
All right, so the agency has been responding to complaints over the years, and we had started an excellent initiative, or a department rather, in 2013, where we had the Environmental Management Compliance Division that was started or initiated, and they were solely responsible for the management or basically the management of complaints. They had an enforcement arm that usually responded to complaints and sort of ensured that persons who would have received an environmental authorization were in compliance with most of the conditions or the terms that were set out. So that division was really successful in terms of managing those complaints over the years. And recently we had a restructure at the agency whereby that department is no longer there. However, we have strengthened efforts now under a new executive director, and we have resuscitated the complaints department. So that task is being is being delegated to me. So I have that responsibility now to coordinate and to ensure that complaints are adequately responded to, or effectively or efficiently resolved. So the complaints department is fairly new. We started recently, and we are in the process of looking at complaints that we have received in the agency and also on our social media pages. And that is our priority at the moment. We are looking to address those. And also we have some backlog complaints that we are also looking into. So the whole objective of the department is to have a quick and easy, or quick and fast response to complaints.
Yes, so just a point to note, the current executive director was actually the director of the EMCD, and we both worked under
Yes.
Mr. Parasram. So you can be assured that he will hold our feet to the fire, to have us do our tasks in a very diligent and efficient manner. So let's talk about the process of how complaints are managed by the agency. You already alluded to some of the systems that we have in place. We have our Facebook page set up, and the volume and the nature of the complaints that we receive is really astounding. So we really want to ensure that we are aware of our environment, we are aware of how our actions affect our neighbors and those around us. And so, we really want to reduce that volume of complaints that come to the Facebook page. So walk us through the process of how complaints are managed from the time you receive it to the time that a matter is closed.
Right. So, as you mentioned, we do receive quite a lot of complaints, and we are managing in excess of 2,500 complaints at the agency.
Wow.
Right. So, upon receipt of a complaint, that complaint is forwarded to our database and our records department. So they make a record of that complaint in our system, and then that complaint now is forwarded to us. And what we do is that we sort of screen these complaints, right? We screen them to ensure that there is adequate details. The persons provided adequate details in terms of their contact, in terms of their names, or location where to get the pollution. And let me just point this out that these information that we collect are strictly confidential. They're only for our internal purposes. So we don't give out or divulge any information to the public. So when we receive that complaint, it's recorded, it's forwarded to the complaints department, then we do our investigation. And we plan our investigation strategically. We sort of gather complaints within a scope of, or within an area, and we go out and investigate, because we're trying to maximize time and resources at the agency as well. So we try to group our complaints. So if we have complaints from east coast of Demerara, we look from Georgetown to probably Mahaika, Maikoni. We look at all those complaints within that range. And we go out, do our investigation. Then we come back, we do our reporting. Then recommendations are made. Recommendations would be sent to the polluter, and the complainant will also be notified of the findings of the investigation. Most instances, we would recommend or give mitigation measures to these polluters to actually reduce the amount of nuisance to the environment. And usually this is given with a timeline. So the agency also has the responsibility to follow up during after the timeline would have expired. So we follow up after the timeline would have expired. Then we see if you're not adhering to the measures that we send, then we take more stringent measures on you. So you can even have legal actions being brought against you. Our act speaks about prohibition notice, whereby if you are not in compliance with our regulations or measures that are prescribed to you, the agency can issue a prohibition notice to you or a cessation order, meaning they can cease your operation. Right?
Okay, so just let me give a little bit of pause there. So when a prohibition notice is issued, what does this really mean?
So a prohibition notice is basically issued to you when you're not in compliance with the measures that we would have sent you. And the prohibition notice sorts of gives you some time basically to implement those measures, right? And if you don't implement those measures within that specific time frame, then we can take you to court. It goes to court. So we can prosecute you legally. And then you would have to pay fines, or there's also imprisonment. Right? So
Right.
that really encompasses a prohibition notice.
Okay, and the cease order.
So the cease order now is whereby the agency can give you that order to cease all operations until you would have remedied the actions or would have implemented measures that were given to you. So that gives the cessation order, gives the EPA that power to basically cease operation until the persons would have gathered all the requisite approvals or implement the measures that we would have recommended.
Okay, and of course, at the EPA, we're not in the business of, stymieing development or shutting down businesses right away. Our approach is to really work with the business community, work with developers and operators to ensure that they are in compliance from the get-go, and really to bring education and awareness to persons so that we don't have to go the route of prosecution, because we know that's a lengthy process, and all the other things that come with having to go to court.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really our approach at the agency at the moment. We are trying to work with developers, right? But we also expect them to work with us.
Yes,
So if we would have given you some measures, we expect you to implement them. If you need some help, the agency is always there. You can call us, right? We had a few instances where polluters would have made contact with the agency to find out, that, hey, I have to implement this measure. How do you think I should go about it? And these are the things that we want. We want to work with you. We don't want to shut down your business because we understand that persons make a living out of these businesses, right? So we're trying really hard to work with these developers, right, to get them in compliance with the regulations and the guidelines, so that everybody could basically be happy and be trouble-free, basically, in their communities.
Right, and indeed that is the aim, because the Constitution does speak to the right of every Guyanese to enjoy a clean and healthy environment. And of course, you have to
Exactly.
participate in that process as well. That is also in the Constitution. All right, so let's talk about the nature of the complaints that are received at the agency, because you did mention that you would normally group the complaints. So where do we find environmental complaints occurring most frequently, and what are the nature of the complaints that you receive?
All right, so our Environmental Protection Act speaks about different types of complaints. So we have noise complaints, we have complaints as it relates to air, so things like odor, dust, we have fumes. We also have complaints as it relates to solid waste, so dumping, burning, littering, right? We also have some other complaints where it impacts soil and water and so on. But some major type of complaints that we do receive at the agency are basically odor nuisances from poultry rearing operations or livestock operations. We also receive a lot regarding dust and fumes from furniture workshops, spray painting workshops, auto body mechanic shops, and noise also from bars and religious places also. So we sort of group those complaints when we go out. We try to have like a mixture of them, and then we go and investigate. And in terms of our hotspots, we have hotspots across the length and breadth of Guyana. However, Region 2, Region 3, 4, and 6 are listed as our hotspots. Those are the areas that we receive the bulk of the complaints for. And I must tell you, Region 4 is on top of that list, especially the Georgetown area, where we receive a lot of complaints regarding drainage and dumping of garbage and so on.
Yeah, so you mentioned drainage, and that brings me to my next point. But before we get there, I also want to share with our audience that we have a lot of material to raise awareness on mitigation measures that you can take to reduce instances of pollution. We have our guidelines, and you mentioned the poultry operations. We have poultry rearing guidelines, swine rearing, spray painting. We have brochures on good environmental practices for restaurants, for mechanic workshops. So we encourage you to reach out to the agency and, be informed. I do believe that is the first step in the environmental management process. It's to be aware, to be informed, to be educated, and then you can go about making the right decisions. So,
Exactly.
our motto at the EPA is the environment is everybody's business.
Definitely.
Right? And so the EPA cannot do this alone.
Yeah.
We partner with organizations for a number of environmental issues. And so let's talk about the partnership that EPA is looking to forge with some of these agencies.
Right, so that's an excellent point. We do need this collaboration or this partnership with other agencies to actually resolve these complaints. And we have recognized over the past years that there are some agencies out there that have mandate to respond to these complaints or have jurisdiction over these complaints. However, most of these complaints still come to the agency. So that whole realization has birthed an engagement with the Ministry of Local Government and Regional Development. Our executive director, Mr. Parshram, he reached out to them, and we basically are actually doing a series of engagements at the moment. And as you mentioned, education is key. So this whole exercise is also part of education and awareness, whereby we are meeting with the various regional democratic councils and the neighborhood democratic councils, which are the RDCs and the NDCs, to basically let them know about their role, right? Because they have a very important role in resolving these complaints within their district. And there are a few pieces of legislations that they use or that they are guided by. One is the Local Government Act, and then there is the Public Health Ordinance, which gives them power to sort of look at various matters, and things like poultry rearing within a residential community could be handled by the NDC. We have things like drainage and many other issues, garbage, littering, and so on, could be handled by the NDC. But also, if they need that intervention or that help, they can reach out to the agency. So the whole engagement with the NDC is basically we are reaching out to them, letting them know that what is their role basically in helping us to resolve these complaints. And we are also engaging them to let them know that they're not alone, that the agency will help. And we are expecting the NDCs and the RDCs to be what we deemed as first responders. So we receive a complaint, right? And we must be able to get into contact with these NDCs. That's why I'm going to mention something very important just now. We reach out to these NDCs and we be like, hey, we have a complaint within your area. We want you to go and investigate it, or want to let us know what is happening on ground. So they go and investigate this complaint, and they can definitely reach out to us and give us the information, or feed us that information about the inspection, what's happening, what needs to be done. Then if there is need to actually prosecute or to take steps further, they can reach out to the agency. Right? So we're building that sort of partnership with them, whereby we are also planning to do some capacity sessions with the NDC, because we understand that some of them they have some serious gaps in terms of collection of evidence or reporting, and they might be constrained by certain resources. So we are planning to work with the Ministry of Local Government and the NDCs to have that capacity building session done, so we can let them know about what are the best ways to actually collect or record information when you go and do an inspection, and many other issues, or many other aspects of the complaint. Sorry, but I mentioned something that I put off, but it's actually building that contact with the NDC. So part of our sessions, we are actually collecting and recording their contact, which gives us basically a contact list. So we will be able to go and reach out to them directly. If we have a matter on hand and we see it's in Better Hope, we would have contact for all the members or the chairman within the Better Hope NDC, and we can reach out to them directly. So that is the whole partnership with the Ministry of Local Government. We are also partnering with other sector agencies in terms of if they have any complaints that is urgent, we do respond to them.
All right. So I do recall that recently there were meetings with some enforcement agencies. So just shine a light for us on which agencies and what was the nature of those meetings.
So recently we had two engagements, one with the Ministry of Home Affairs, where we are actually targeting noise. And over the years, we were in engagement with them, but we sort of now want to strengthen that engagement, whereby we are partnering with them for the reduction of noise within these areas. And we have complaints coming from bars, complaints coming from religious places, hotels. So we want that enforcement arm with us. So the police would usually accompany officers when they go and do these inspections, right, as it relates to the noise. Also, we had an engagement with the mayor and city council recently, and that is to discuss the major issue that is happening in Georgetown.
Oh, yes. I don't think we need to spell it out, but you can still, for the sake of our audience, say what that major issue is.
Exactly. By now you should know. So it's related to garbage and littering, basically. So we had that engagement with them where we are trying to collaborate with them, basically, to help us in that regard, because the EPA is guided by the litter prevention regulations, and that regulations also speaks about delegation, whereby we can delegate certain agency to help us to resolve those issues. And we will have a few other engagements with them, because we are trying to develop, plans or develop programs to actually make persons aware of the regulations and make persons know that, littering is a crime, basically. So they should desist from doing that, right? So we are going to be engaging the mayor and city council more, and also other agency and municipalities as well.
All right. So are there plans to engage any non-state agencies?
Well, yes. As I mentioned, complaints is all around us, right? And if there is need, or if there is an issue that is being deemed or being reported rather by a non-state agency, and they need assistance, then we will respond, and we will have engagements with them to actually resolve those matters.
Okay, so public, you are assured that the EPA is working around the clock to bring resolution to environmental complaints. With that, we will take our first ad break. Stay tuned. You are watching The Environment Matters.
At the Environmental Protection Agency, we believe that the environment is everybody's business. We can start caring for our planet by becoming more environmentally friendly in our everyday actions. Here's what you can do: dispose of waste in a garbage bin, clean our drains, yards, and carpets regularly, take a reusable shopping bag to the market, support local butchers and farmers to reduce packaged waste, plant a kitchen garden, trees and flowers, compost your organic waste, conserve water and electricity, carry a reusable water bottle. These little acts are good for your health and that of the environment. Remember, healthy people work better and achieve more, and together, small actions make a big difference. For further information on how you can help, please contact the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, Ganges Street, Sophia, or telephone us at 225-5467. You can also visit our website, epaguyana.org, or our Facebook and Instagram pages.
Attention all miners. Mining is important to Guyana's development, and so is our biodiversity. Practice smart mining. Use a retort, dispose of your waste properly, manage your tailings well, and reclaim mined out areas. Remember, improper mining is a threat to your health, biodiversity, and a hindrance to prosperity. A message from the Environmental Protection Agency and Ministry of Natural Resources with funding from JEF through the United Nations.
If you're now joining us, in the first half of our program, Mr. Surjpaul Singh, the head of the complaints unit at the EPA, was sharing with us the role of the EPA in complaints management, that is environmental complaints, and some of the partnerships that we forged. He talked about the nature of some of the complaints that we receive, hotspots, enforcement actions, and so on. Now we want to switch our discussion to talk about emergency response at the EPA. So, Surjpaul, welcome back.
Thank you.
And we want to start our discussion on emergency response by stating what constitutes an environmental emergency.
All right, so an environmental emergency is basically a sudden threat to the environment. I'll put it in simple terms. So it's a sudden threat to the environment that may have the potential to cause significant harm, whether it's to the environment or whether it's to public health or to livelihoods. So these type of disasters, or they could be natural events, they do not show right away. So we do not know when an environmental emergency or an environmental disaster will happen. So we at the agency always have to be prepared to respond to these emergencies, right? So we have emergencies that could be natural, they could be technological, they could be man-made or human-induced. So things like we have, and I'm pretty sure the public is well aware, we have oil spills is listed as an emergency. We have things like tailings dam. If there is a disruption or a breach in those dams, that is constitute an environmental emergency. We also have things like chemical spills and fish kills and explosives, and the list goes on. But as it relates to the emergency, the agency is ready, and our act says that we have that responsibility also to respond to these emergencies.
Right. So in responding to emergencies, tell us about the systems that are currently in place at the EPA.
All right. So basically, when we receive an emergency, it is usually recorded, right, and it is usually directed to the relevant or the respective department, right, and then we gather all our gather all the different aspects that is required to respond to this emergency. So things like we need to gather our team, we need to gather our evidence collecting apparatus or equipment, and then we respond to the emergency. In terms of the current systems that are in place at the agency, we have what is called an environmental emergency roster. And that roster sorts of outline who are the persons responsible for responding to emergencies, at a certain time, right? So it's divided, and emergencies actually could be complaints as well. So whenever an emergency, we respond to one, or we receive one rather, we have that team that is already mobilized, right? And then we reach out to them, they gather, and they go and they investigate. So when they reach there, they do things like site inspection, they observe the surroundings. There are instances where they're required to take sampling, right? So they will go equipped and they will go ready to collect those evidence.
All right, so in our prior discussion, we were talking about plans to strengthen the agency's emergency response. So Can you share those plans with our audience?
Yeah, so basically, we realize that these emergencies can happen anytime. So we want to sort to have strengthened enforcement or strengthened efforts, basically, to respond to these complaints. And one such effort is that we're trying to collaborate more with partnering agencies. And we also have a list at the agency of possible agencies that an if an emergency do occur, we can always reach out to these agency. So for example, if we have an emergency that is reported to us as it relates to a mining pit, we can easily reach out to the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission. If there's a complaint as it relates to something within a logging concession, we can also reach out to the Guyana Forestry Commission. Similarly, if there's a fish kill, we can also reach out to the Ministry of Agriculture and by extension the Fisheries Department to actually collaborate with us or actually lend support in actually going and investigate these emergencies and sort of bring a resolution or sort of actually help the developers, if it do occur by a company or facility, give them best practices to sort of clean up or dispose the any contaminants to the environment. So that is one of our efforts that we're trying to do, build that collaboration. And also our executive director, Mr. Parsham, he's very keen on having technologies being used at the agency. So we are sort of looking at gathering remote sensing technologies to basically detect these emergencies as they occur. Because usually sometimes the emergency or the incident rather may happen, and then it usually takes a time for the agency to be notified, and by then it probably would have spread somewhere or extend to a larger area. So if we can detect these emergencies or these incidents at a early stage, we would be able to go and sort of contain it within one place or sort of clean up it basically.
Okay.
Right? So we're looking at that. We are trying to strengthen the collaboration with the other agencies. And also we are trying to look at some remote sensing technologies and possible use of GIS to actually detect these emergency. And let me just mention, we have systems in place to detect flaring at the agency. So when there is flaring, when there is anything that has to do with oil and oil spills and stuff, we have some capacity to actually look at those or to gather those information.
Yes, and you stated already too that the capacity or the role when it comes to emergency response does not lie with the agency alone. And when you mentioned, like spills, I know that there are also plans and procedures in place to deal with certain environmental emergencies. So we partner with agencies as well, like the CDC, with the Guyana Police Force. We partner with the Pesticide and Toxic Chemicals Control Board and so on. So public, rest assured you are in good hands when it comes to our emergency response as well. The EPA is working hard to ensure that we maintain a clean and healthy environment for all Guyanese. We are winding down to the end of our show. Surjpaul, is there any word of advice that you'd like to leave with our audience? I mean, you are the head of complaints, so what is it you want to share with our audience?
All right, so I just want to leave a little message whereby I want persons to respect each other, right? And when you respect each other, you basically respect the environment. So I want to encourage persons to, work in harmony. Basically, if there's a complaint within your neighborhood or your area, the simplest method to resolve it is by talking. You engage the person, you let them know that this thing is affecting you, and then if you don't get any help from that, then you can definitely reach out to the agencies and your NDC. But the main message is just to respect each other, and by extension, you will respect the environment.
All right, thank you so much. Now that brings us to the end of our show. Remember to submit your environmental complaints to the EPA by calling 225-5469. I'll repeat that, 225-5469. That is our complaints hotline. It's a 24-hour hotline. If you don't get the chance to speak to an officer, we encourage you to leave a message, and that message will be checked very first thing in the morning when the officers come in. You can also send an email to complaints@epaguyana.org. I got that right.
Yes,
right?
yes, you do.
You can also visit our offices at Ganji Street, Sophia, that's in Georgetown, at Wimberbies, that's next to the post office, right behind the police station, or you can go to our Linden office that is located in the Len building in Mackenzie. You can also reach out to us, as we stated earlier, on our Facebook page, the page EPA Guyana. Remember to like and follow us as well on Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can get this and more episodes of The Environment Matters, be updated on what's going on in the agency. Ensure that you pick up a copy of the Sunday Chronicle and the Guyana Times to read our weekly columns. And be sure to tune into your favorite radio station for our bi-weekly radio interviews. Everyone, remember to stay safe, wear your mask, sanitize, get vaccinated, and remember to respect each other and the environment. Thank you so much for joining us.
Come around, please.
Morning. My name is Deborah. I just want to get some information.
Good morning. I am Odessa Duncan, Senior Environmental Officer. How may I assist you today?
Tell me something. They got this man next door by me breaking on this big building, and it's bare asbestos in the roof. I could remember hearing on your TV program that asbestos is dangerous to human health and the environment.
This is correct. The Environmental Protection Act states that any person or facility that is storing, treating, transporting, and/or disposing of hazardous waste material must be authorized by the EPA to do so.
Oh, but it's now I'm really hearing about this hazardous wasting. Tell me something more.
Hazardous waste are waste material with properties that are dangerous or capable of having a harmful effect on human health and the environment, including things like paint, fertilizers, and pesticides, waste oil, and asbestos. These things have the potential to cause cancer, birth defects, kidney failure, and reproductive impairment, with children being at the highest risk. The environmental authorization in this case gives the legal right to transport, store, and dispose of this material in accordance with the EP Act Chapter 2005 Laws of Guyana. Now, this ensures you and your operation and your process is safe for the environment and human health.
So you mean to tell me that all them leftover Christmas paint that I got on in my kitchen sink, I need authorization from EPA to get rid of it?
No, Miss Deborah. These items, once used for household purposes, does not require environmental authorization from the EPA. However, you should still take necessary steps to ensure that these materials are stored and disposed of in an environmentally safe manner.
Thank you so much for the information. I go in and tell he that he needs an environmental authorization. Thank you.